It was supposed to be a regular morning in a busy courthouse. People shuffled in and out of the courtroom, each with their own problems, stories, and struggles. The air was filled with the low hum of conversation, the occasional squeak of shoes on the polished floor, and the quiet rustle of paperwork. It was just another day for Officer Daniels, a well-known face in the courthouse, someone who took his job seriously and didn't ask too many questions. That morning, though, everything was about to change. She walked in with quiet confidence, dressed in a dark suit, her posture straight, eyes sharp, and presence calm but commanding. She didn't wear a badge on her chest, didn't flash any credentials, and to most onlookers, she appeared to be just another woman sitting quietly in the back row of the courtroom. But something about her stood out. Her energy, her awareness, the way she scanned the room without looking nervous or out of place. What no one knew yet was that she was an FBI agent, and she was there for a reason. Officer Daniels didn't recognize her, and maybe that's where things started to unravel. He saw her glance at her phone, whisper something into a tiny earpiece, and then lean back like she wasn't concerned about what was happening around her. That, to him, was suspicious. He didn't wait long before walking straight up to her. "Excuse me, ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me," he said. She raised an eyebrow, not in defiance, but in slight disbelief. "Why?" she asked calmly. "You're not allowed to have electronic devices in this area," he said flatly, already reaching for his handcuffs. She didn't resist, but her tone shifted. "I suggest you stop right there," she said, voice firm now. "You don't want to do this." But Daniels didn't listen. He reached for her wrist, already convinced that he was handling a threat. What happened next left the entire courtroom in stunned silence. It was just the beginning of something much bigger. Because exactly 7 minutes later, the truth about who she was and why she was there would flip the script completely. And karma? It didn't wait long to make its appearance. Across town, in a small city bus rolling through a quiet neighborhood, another story was unfolding, one that seemed much smaller at first, but would carry just as much weight. A teenage boy, probably no older than 17, sat near the front of the bus, headphones in, hoodie pulled over his head. He looked tired, like maybe he had worked a night shift or had a long day ahead of him. But despite whatever was on his mind, he noticed her as soon as she stepped on board, a pregnant woman, maybe in her 30s, struggling slightly to balance as the bus jolted forward. Without hesitation, he stood up and offered her a seat. She looked surprised at first, maybe even a little unsure, but smiled gratefully and sat down. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded, gave a small smile, and returned to standing near the back of the bus. But what he didn't expect, and what would change the course of his life, was the note she handed him as she stepped off the bus 20 minutes later. It wasn't just a thank you. It was something else. Something that would make headlines, spark conversations across social media, and remind people that small acts of kindness could still carry unimaginable power. Two different people. Two completely different situations. One courthouse. One city bus. But both stories had one thing in common. They started with a moment of judgment and ended with something no one could have seen coming. As the courtroom tension escalates and the bus pulls away into the city traffic, both characters are about to discover how powerful a single choice can be. And in just a few moments, everything is going to change. Officer Daniels wasn't new to strange encounters in the courthouse. Over the years, he dealt with all kinds: agitated defendants, nervous witnesses, nosy journalists. But something about this woman got under his skin. Maybe it was the way she didn't react. Most people get flustered when a uniform approaches. They stammer, fumble for ID, try to explain themselves. But she didn't do any of that. She just stared at him. Cool, steady, unreadable. And that only made him more suspicious. He was convinced she was hiding something. And, to be fair, she was, but not the kind of thing Daniels thought. Her name was Agent Monique Harris, a senior field agent with the FBI, working undercover on a high-profile corruption case tied to the very courthouse she sat in. Her orders were clear: observe quietly, do not interfere, and above all, do not reveal her identity unless absolutely necessary. That morning, She had come to monitor a key figure involved in the investigation, someone who was scheduled to appear in court. But now, with a local officer pressing in on her, about to detain her without cause, everything was at risk. She glanced around. A few people were watching, but no one stepped in. Maybe they assumed she was in trouble. Maybe they thought the officer knew something they didn't. That's the thing about authority. It tends to draw silence. And Officer Daniels, with his confident stride and stern expression, didn't look like a man who could be easily questioned. "You're making a mistake," she told him again, quieter this time, eyes locked on his. Daniels ignored her and reached for the cuffs again. But before he could snap them on, a voice echoed from across the room. "Daniels, what are you doing?" It was Judge Reynolds, stepping out from the side chamber, his robe barely on, eyes wide as he took in the scene. Daniels straightened up immediately. "Sir, I was just detaining this woman. She was communicating through a device. Against protocol." The judge stepped closer, peering at the woman. For a split second, his face changed. Just slightly. Like he recognized her, but didn't want to admit it. "Let her go," he said firmly. Daniels hesitated. "Now." He unclipped the cuff slowly, confused but obeying. Agent Harris didn't say a word. She simply stood, adjusted her blazer, and walked toward the side exit without glancing back. But as she passed the judge, she whispered just loud enough for him to hear, "This isn't over." Daniels stood frozen. He knew something was off now, but he didn't know just how deep it ran. Meanwhile, on that quiet city bus winding its way through downtown, the teenage boy leaned against the railing, eyes on the window, thinking about nothing in particular. His name was Jamal. 17, soft-spoken, smart, but always tired. He juggled school, a part-time job at a grocery store, and helping his mom with his younger siblings at home. He didn't expect thanks when he gave up his seat. He was raised to treat people with respect. Especially elders. Especially pregnant women. But the woman he gave his seat to seemed different. She kept glancing at him. Not in a strange way, more like she was thinking about something. Like she was working through a decision. She didn't say much, just smiled a little when their eyes met. When her stop came, she stood carefully, then turned toward him before stepping off. She reached into her coat pocket and handed him a folded note. "This is for you," she said gently. "Don't open it now. Wait until you get home." He was caught off guard, but nodded and tucked it into his backpack. The rest of his ride passed quietly, but the note weighed heavy in his mind. What could it be? A thank you? A phone number? A weird complaint? He'd heard stories of people getting accused of stuff just for being kind. But she didn't seem like that type. Back at the courthouse, Agent Harris walked briskly through a restricted hallway, heart beating fast. She had to make a call. What happened in that courtroom wasn't just a mistake. It could have blown months of undercover work. Someone on the inside was onto her. She'd felt it, seen it in the judge's eyes. She dialed her contact at the bureau and stepped into a private room. "They're watching," she said quietly. "One of them recognized me. I'm pulling out before it goes bad." "Understood," came the reply. "We'll reroute the operation. Get to the safe location and wait for further instructions." As she ended the call, her hands trembled slightly. She wasn't scared, but she knew things were about to get harder. The case she was working on involved more than just local corruption. It tied into a federal investigation, one that linked judges, attorneys, and even law enforcement to an organized network of bribery and obstruction. And the closer she got to the truth, the more dangerous things became. Back on the bus, Jamal finally reached a stop. He stepped off, walked past the corner store, and headed down the familiar sidewalk toward his apartment building. The note still sat in his backpack, unopened. His curiosity grew with every step. As soon as he got inside and kicked off his shoes, he dropped his bag on the couch and pulled it out. The paper was neatly folded, the handwriting elegant. He opened it slowly, eyes scanning the words, each line making his heart beat faster. What it said wasn't simple. It wasn't just thanks. It was something much more personal, more serious. Something about him. Something about his life. Things no stranger should have known. His hands started shaking. He read it again, this time more slowly. And then again. And that's when it hit him, his life was never going to be the same. In two separate corners of the same city, two people had made ordinary decisions. A woman had stepped into a courtroom. A boy had offered up his seat. But the outcomes of their actions were about to collide in ways no one could have predicted. And neither of them knew they were already part of the same story. Jamal sat on the edge of the couch, the note still in his hand. The words on that piece of paper were burned into his mind. Whoever the woman was, she knew things, specific, personal things. She mentioned his mother by name. She knew where he went to school. She even wrote about the scholarship application Jamal had been too nervous to submit. Things he hadn't told anyone, not even his closest friends. And at the end of the note, in neat handwriting, she left a phone number and a name. Call me. My name is Sarah Whitmore. I think I can help change your life. Jamal's heart was pounding, but his instincts told him this wasn't a scam. There was something real in her words, something raw. She hadn't offered money or promises. She had offered opportunity, guidance. But why him? Why now? He pulled out his phone and stared at the number. He didn't call, not yet. He needed to think, to understand what just happened. And deep down, he wondered, what exactly did she want in return? At the same time, Agent Harris sat alone in a safe house across town. Her mind was racing. She pulled out a thin folder from her bag, flipping through documents, photographs, and surveillance notes. Everything was connected, and time was running out. The courthouse incident had forced her hand, but it also confirmed something she suspected. Someone in that building knew she was FBI. And not just anyone. Judge Reynolds had made a call right after she walked out. She had it recorded. What she didn't know yet was who he called, or how high the corruption reached. As she reviewed the files, one photo caught her attention. A blurred image of a man walking out of a government office downtown, someone they hadn't identified yet. But his face looked familiar. She zoomed in. Her eyes narrowed. It was the same officer who tried to cuff her earlier. Officer Daniels. She leaned back in her chair, connecting dots. Daniels wasn't just doing his job. He was part of something bigger, something hidden beneath the surface of city politics and law enforcement. A dirty system that had been protecting powerful people for years. Back in the city, Daniels was pacing his apartment, replaying the courtroom scene over and over. The way she looked at him, the judge's reaction, the strange tension in the air. Something was off. He had been told to keep an eye out for outside agents possibly sniffing around. He thought he had done the right thing. But now he wasn't so sure. His phone buzzed. A private message. You were warned. Don't engage with her again. Watch your step. R. Daniels stared at the message, feeling a chill run down his spine. He didn't know who R was exactly, but he'd received similar warnings before, always anonymous, always direct. This wasn't just about protocol anymore. It was about survival. Meanwhile, Sarah Whitmore sat in her office, sipping tea, her mind still on the boy from the bus. Jamal. She hadn't planned to act that day. But something about him reminded her of her own son, who had died years ago. The way he stood without hesitation, the quiet kindness in his eyes, it stirred something in her. And she knew potential when she saw it. What Jamal didn't know was that Sarah wasn't just a stranger. She was a retired civil rights attorney, now working with a private foundation that helped underprivileged youth get access to education and career paths they never thought possible. She didn't hand out opportunities lightly. But she also knew what it meant to reach someone at the right time, before the streets or the system swallowed them up. Still, she was holding back a deeper truth. She hadn't told Jamal yet that she knew his father. A man Jamal believed had walked out on them. The real story was much more complicated. But that truth would have to wait. As night fell, Jamal finally picked up his phone and dialed the number from the note. It rang twice, then clicked. Hello. A warm, calm voice answered. Hi. My name's Jamal. You gave me a note on the bus earlier today. There was a pause. Then, I'm glad you called. I know you have questions. Meet me tomorrow. I'll explain everything. He agreed, still unsure, but something told him he had to go. Whatever this was, it mattered. Back at the safe house, Agent Harris stared at the wall, tracing the web of names and connections in her head. She knew the judge was compromised. She suspected Daniels was involved. But there were still missing pieces. Who was pulling the strings? And how much danger was she really in? She got up and checked the window. Across the street, parked 2 houses down, a black SUV hadn't moved in over an hour. She'd noticed it when she arrived, but now she was sure it was watching her. She closed the curtain slowly and sat back down. She needed backup. She needed a way out. But most of all, she needed to finish what she started. Because whatever they were hiding, it wasn't just about money or power. It was about justice. And the closer she got, the more dangerous it became. Somewhere in the city, a quiet storm was brewing. People were being watched. Truths were being buried. And fate was slowly pulling all the threads together. Jamal, Sarah, Daniels, Harris. Different lives. Different struggles. But soon, their worlds would crash into one another. And when they did, nothing would ever be the same again. Rain tapped against the windows of the diner where Jamal waited the next morning. He sat in a corner booth, hands tucked in his hoodie pocket, eyes scanning every person who walked through the door. He had barely slept. The note, the phone call, everything kept playing in his head. He didn't know what to expect, only that something in his life was shifting, like the ground beneath him had started to crack open. The bell above the door jingled, and there she was, Sarah Whitmore, calm as ever, umbrella in hand, smile soft but serious. She sat across from him, set her bag down, and slid a folder onto the table without saying a word. Jamal looked at it, then at her. "What is this?" he asked. "It's your story," she said quietly. "The parts you haven't been told." Inside the folder were documents. Birth records. A photo of a man he didn't recognize at first. A letter, handwritten, signed by a name he hadn't heard in years, his father's. Sarah didn't push. She let him open it in his own time. As he read, his hands started shaking again. The man he thought had abandoned him hadn't left by choice. He had been arrested, framed, silenced. And that's where Sarah came in. She had been his father's lawyer before everything fell apart. But the system was too big, too dirty, and too protected. They lost the case. And Jamal's father disappeared into the cracks of a broken justice system. Jamal couldn't speak. Everything he thought he knew had been turned inside out. But one thing was clear now, this wasn't just about kindness on a bus. Sarah hadn't found him by accident. She had been watching, waiting, and when she saw him give up the seat, it was like watching his father's spirit move through him. That's when she knew it was time. Back across the city, Agent Harris prepared for the meeting that could change everything. She had managed to trace the judge's call to a private number registered under a shell company, one tied to multiple suspicious real estate deals and hidden accounts. It led to someone bigger than she had expected. A name she had hoped wasn't involved, Assistant District Attorney Raymond Locke. Locke had always positioned himself as a champion of justice. He appeared on local news often talking about reforms, cleaning up the system, giving power back to the people. But behind the scenes, he had his hands deep in the corruption Harris had been chasing for months. He was connected to at least 3 falsified convictions, including the case of Jamal's father. And now, with Harris closing in, he was getting desperate. Unbeknownst to her, Locke had already found out about her investigation. That black SUV watching her safe house wasn't just surveillance. It was a warning. And if she didn't back off soon, she'd be next. Meanwhile, Officer Daniels was unraveling. He sat in his car, parked outside the precinct, watching rain streak down his windshield. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. He had followed orders for years, done what he was told, kept his head down. But now, guilt was creeping in. He had tried to arrest an FBI agent. He had been told she was a threat. But now, he wasn't sure who the real threat was. He pulled out his phone and typed a message. "I want out. I'm not doing this anymore." He stared at the screen, hesitated, then hit send. Seconds later, a reply came through. "Too late. You're already in." Daniels slammed the phone down. He knew then he wasn't a cop anymore. He was a pawn. Back at the diner, Jamal and Sarah sat in silence. Why are you showing me all this now? Jamal finally asked. Because you need to know what you come from, she said. You need to know the truth before someone else tries to twist it. Your father didn't leave you. He was taken. And now we have a chance to expose the people who did it. Jamal's voice was barely above a whisper.
How?
I've reopened his case, she said. But we'll need more than evidence. We need someone from the inside. The pieces were falling into place. But they needed one more thing. Agent Harris. And she was already one step ahead. That afternoon, Harris parked a block away from Locke's office. She had everything she needed: recordings, paper trails, witness statements. But something still didn't add up. Why now? Why had they let it go this far? She stepped out of the car, every sense alert. She knew she was being watched. She could feel it. But she had come too far to stop now. She entered the building, walked past security with a forged clearance, and rode the elevator to the top floor. The doors opened, and there he was, Locke, standing in his glass-walled office, staring out at the city like he owned it. She stepped inside. He turned slowly, smiled, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. Agent Harris, he said, like they were old friends. I've been expecting you. She didn't smile back. Then you know why I'm here. Oh, I have a good idea. But I think you're walking into something you don't fully understand. Outside, two men in dark suits entered the lobby. Not police. Not federal agents. Private. Quiet. The kind of men who didn't leave paper trails. Upstairs, the air between Harris and Locke grew heavy. There's no way out for you now, she said. This is bigger than your lies. Bigger than the courthouse. I have everything. Locke walked to his desk and tapped a file. And I have this, he said. You think I don't know who you really are? Where you've been? Who you've spoken to? We've been watching you since day one. And you've already lost. She didn't blink. We'll see. Downstairs, Jamal stood outside the building with Sarah beside him. They had come to find Harris, to show her the missing piece of the puzzle. But they didn't know the danger waiting inside. And inside, time was running out. Everyone was in place now. The agent, the boy, the lawyer, the officer, and the man behind it all. The final move was coming. But none of them were ready for what was about to happen next. Just as Jamal reached for the door handle of the building, Sarah gently grabbed his arm, her eyes fixed on something across the street. A man in a gray hoodie leaned against a light pole, pretending to scroll his phone, but his eyes hadn't left the building for minutes. Sarah recognized the look. Not casual, not curious, but trained. She had seen men like that before. The kind who didn't wear badges but always carried orders. She turned to Jamal, voice low but firm. We need to wait. Jamal looked at her, confused. What? We came all this way. Agent Harris is in there. She needs us. Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. If we go in now, we might not come back out. Inside, Agent Harris stood tall, though her mind was racing. She could feel it, the weight of being surrounded, boxed in. She knew Locke had backup, and she knew that if anything happened here, no one was calling for help. But then something unexpected happened. Locke's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, and for the first time, his calm cracked. He answered with a short, yes? The voice on the other end was clipped and urgent. Whatever was said made Locke's eyes narrow. He hung up quickly, then turned toward Harris. Seems your little story just got a new chapter, he said. She didn't flinch. What now? Someone leaked your files, he said. Everything. The recordings, the photos, the connections, all of it. To the media. That stopped her. Harris hadn't told anyone outside her tightest circle. And even then, she had been careful. But if the files were out, it meant someone had broken into her encrypted drive, or someone close to her had turned. She stepped back, heart pounding. You're bluffing. Locke shook his head, half smirking. You think you're the only one playing a long game? Outside, Sarah's phone buzzed. She looked down, then froze. Her contact at the legal network had sent a screenshot, a news outlet's homepage. The headline, District Attorney's Office under investigation after leak reveals pattern of corruption and wrongful convictions. Jamal leaned over, and read it too. His face went pale. That's him. That's the guy in the office, he whispered. That's the one who framed my dad. Sarah nodded slowly.
Yes.
And now the world knows. But instead of relief, she felt a sinking feeling in her stomach. Something about the timing was too perfect, too clean. Someone had waited until they were all too close, then detonated the truth on their terms. It wasn't just about exposure, it was about control. Back in the office, Locke grabbed a remote and turned on the small TV mounted on the wall. The same headline rolled across the screen. The anchor's voice echoed into the tense room, detailing the decades-long corruption scandal just now coming to light. Names were listed: judges, officers, lawyers, and among them, Officer Daniels. Harris stepped forward. Looks like you're out of time. But Locke didn't panic. Instead, he looked at her with an eerie calm. I may be going down, he said, but I'm not going alone. At that same moment, Officer Daniels sat in his patrol car outside a courthouse annex, his hand shaking. His name had just flashed across a live broadcast in bold letters.
He knew what that meant. He was the fall guy.
A piece meant to be sacrificed to keep others safe. He thought about running, but where? He had no one left. Then his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered, voice low. Yeah. The voice on the other end was Sarah. Daniels. We know you're not the one behind this. But you're in danger. Meet us now. We can get you protection. He didn't ask how she got his number. He didn't even question her tone. He just said, where? Back outside the building, Jamal and Sarah had moved to the alleyway entrance, away from the watchers. Just as they reached the side door, Daniels pulled up fast, tires screeching slightly as he stopped. He stepped out, still in uniform, but with none of the authority he usually wore. His eyes flicked nervously toward the main entrance. Tell me this is real, he said. Sarah nodded. As real as it gets. But we don't have much time. Suddenly, there was a commotion inside the building. Glass shattered from above. Jamal ducked instinctively. People on the street turned to look. Two men in suits rushed out of the lobby, pushing past pedestrians, clearly in a hurry. Daniels narrowed his eyes. Those are Locke's guys. They don't move like that unless something's gone bad. Sarah's heart raced. That means Agent Harris is in trouble. Without another word, Daniels led them through the side door. The building was quiet inside, eerily so. They moved quickly up the stairs, avoiding the main halls. Each step echoed like a warning. Upstairs, Locke stood in his office, phone to his ear again, pacing. He hadn't seen Harris slip something under his coat. A small flash drive, backup of everything she had gathered. She moved slowly toward the exit, but Locke turned sharply. You think this ends with a broadcast? He hissed. They'll bury the story, just like they always do. You're not saving anyone. But Harris looked him dead in the eye. You're wrong. This time, people are watching. And just then the office door burst open. Daniels entered first, gun drawn but lowered. Behind him, Jamal and Sarah stepped in. For a second, all the air was sucked out of the room. Jamal and Locke locked eyes. That's him, Jamal said quietly, his voice heavy with years of pain. He ruined everything. Locke took a step back, startled to see the boy. What is this? But no one answered. The room had changed. The power had shifted. Still, this wasn't over. Not yet. Sirens wailed in the distance, too many for coincidence. Locke's men had likely called in favors. Time was running out again. And just as they all turned toward the window to assess what was coming, Harris's phone buzzed with a new message. They know you're all inside.
Get out now.
You're not safe. Everything was in motion. The truth was out, but the ones who thrived in the shadows weren't giving up without a fight. And the most dangerous part? The real betrayal hadn't been revealed yet. Everything moved at once. The sound of pounding boots echoed from the stairwell. Officer Daniels turned instinctively, positioning himself in the doorway with one hand on his weapon and the other motioning for everyone to back away. Agent Harris grabbed Jamal and Sarah, pulling them behind Locke's desk just as a blast of wind slammed open a side window. Somewhere outside, a helicopter hovered low, its searchlight flashing over the glass like a warning. Locke's face twisted, caught between panic and disbelief. "They're not supposed to be here yet," he muttered, almost to himself. But no one was listening to him anymore. Daniels spoke fast, his voice tight. "You've got 30 seconds to move.
Go now.
Take the service stairs. I'll stall them." "No," Jamal said suddenly. "He's coming with us." Everyone froze. Jamal stepped forward, eyes locked on Locke. "You're not slipping away again. You're going to answer for what you did to my father, to all of them. I want the world to see you walk into that courtroom." For the first time, Locke looked afraid. Harris grabbed a pair of cuffs from Daniels and snapped them on Locke's wrists. "You're under arrest," she said coldly, "for obstruction, conspiracy, and federal corruption." And that's just the beginning. Locke didn't fight. Maybe he knew it was over. Or maybe he still had a card left to play. They moved fast through the back stairwell, each step lit by the flickering emergency lights. Daniels stayed behind, disappearing into the hallway as backup stormed the top floor. Jamal didn't look back. He kept moving, Sarah beside him, Locke between them, his shoulders hunched, silent. When they reached the basement level, Harris pulled out a radio. "Extraction point in 2 minutes. South Alley." They made it to the door just as the unmarked black van pulled up. Inside were 2 agents Harris trusted with her life. She gave them a nod and motioned for Jamal and Sarah to get in first. Then she turned to Locke. "Get in. Quietly." He hesitated for half a second, then stepped up. But just as he did, another car sped around the corner and skidded to a stop across the alley. Doors flew open. 3 men jumped out, all in suits, none of them with badges showing. One raised something that looked like a radio, but Harris recognized the shape. "Not a radio." She yelled, "Down." But it was too late. A sharp crack echoed through the alley as a shot fired. The bullet hit the side of the van, inches from Jamal. The agents inside returned fire, covering the group. Sarah pulled Jamal to the ground, shielding him. Harris ducked behind a trash bin, heart pounding, her weapon drawn. Then, from the shadows, someone else appeared. Daniels. He moved fast, came up behind the shooters before they even realized he'd left the building. With precise shots, he dropped 2 of them, the third running before Daniels could aim again. It was over in seconds. Sirens blared closer, this time not controlled by anyone corrupt. Local police, media vans, federal backup, all drawn by the earlier leaks and now this gunfire. Jamal sat up, heart racing. "Is everyone okay?" Sarah nodded. Harris stood slowly, lowering her weapon.
"Yeah.
"We're okay." Locke lay on the alley pavement, dazed, blood on his sleeve where a stray piece of shrapnel caught him. His voice was quiet, distant. "They're not going to let me talk." Harris crouched beside him. "They won't have a choice." Hours later, in a secure federal holding center, Locke was booked and processed. Jamal watched from behind a glass partition, arms folded, silent. It wasn't satisfaction he felt. It wasn't even relief. It was weight, heavy and real, like something old had finally ended and something new had just begun. News outlets flooded the airwaves. The story of corruption, of decades of buried cases and silenced victims, dominated headlines. Jamal's story, his seat on the bus, the note, the connection to a buried case, became the human face of the scandal. But just when it seemed like everything had fallen into place, one last twist came. A letter arrived for Jamal. No return address. Inside was a small photograph and a single sentence. The photo was of his father, older, tired, but alive, standing in front of what looked like a small store in a rural town. And the message read, "He's waiting. Be careful who you trust next." Jamal stared at it, breath caught in his throat. Sarah read over his shoulder, her voice barely a whisper. Someone helped him disappear. Harris took the photo, analyzing it closely. This changes everything. Because now they knew someone higher up had pulled strings to erase a man's life. And even with Locke behind bars, the real puppet master was still out there. Jamal folded the photo and tucked it in his pocket. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The sun was barely rising when Jamal stood at the edge of the empty bus stop, the same place where all of this had started. The streets were quiet, just the soft hum of the city waking up. He sat on the bench for a while, holding the photograph in his hand, the one that showed his father alive, out there somewhere. The edges were worn now from how many times he'd pulled it out, just to look at it, to remind himself this wasn't over. But it wasn't anger burning in him anymore. It was something deeper, quieter.
Hope.
It had been a whirlwind of days since Locke's arrest and the fallout from the media storm. News stories ran nonstop. Headlines carried phrases like, FBI agent exposes corrupt court officials, teen's kindness leads to historic justice breakthrough, and whistleblower reveals secrets hidden for decades. Jamal's story wasn't just about the case anymore. It had become a symbol, a reminder that even small, human acts like giving up a seat on a bus could ripple out in unexpected, life-changing ways. Sarah had been beside him through it all. She gave her statement, met with lawyers, and spoke to reporters only when she needed to. Her focus was always on Jamal, making sure he was safe, supported, and grounded. She had seen enough of the system to know how hard it could try to pull you under, even after you win. Agent Harris had gone back to D.C., where she was preparing for formal hearings. Her name was being mentioned alongside words like hero, trailblazer, and whistleblower. But she wasn't focused on praise. She stayed busy helping reopen cases, tracking the real chain of command behind the corruption and following new leads, including the one Jamal gave her about his father. She sent him updates now, and then nothing too dramatic. Just short messages like, still looking. Don't give up. He didn't. Daniels, surprisingly, had turned over a new chapter of his own. After testifying truthfully and assisting in several key arrests, he was offered a deal and quietly relocated. He had chosen to cooperate, not because it was easy, but because it was the right thing, something he hadn't done enough of before. His last message to Jamal was handwritten. What you did mattered. You didn't just speak truth, you made people listen. As for Locke, his trial was scheduled for the following month. His legal team was already trying to cut deals, deflect blame, spin the narrative. But too much had come out. Too many people had stepped forward now, victims, families, even former colleagues. The system was finally facing itself, and Locke was just one piece of the puzzle. Jamal eventually did meet his father. It happened in a quiet diner, hours outside the city. Harris had tracked him down with help from contacts in the Witness Protection Registry, following a paper trail that was never supposed to exist. His father had aged, but his eyes were still the same. When Jamal walked through that door, neither of them spoke at first. They just stood there looking at each other. Then, without a word, they hugged. It wasn't perfect. There were years between them filled with silence, confusion, and pain. But they sat together for hours that day, talking. His father explained everything, how he'd been offered a way out after his conviction was overturned privately by a sympathetic judge, but under pressure to stay hidden to protect others. He'd lived in quiet fear that if he returned, someone would silence him before he could clear his name. The system had not just failed him, it had erased him. Until Jamal brought him back. After that meeting, things didn't change overnight. They never do. But Jamal started to heal. He kept going to school, started sharing his story at events and workshops, helping other young people understand their power. What he'd learned through all of this was that justice isn't a moment, it's a process. One that needs courage, consistency, and community. Sarah went on to finish her law degree. Her dream was clearer now. She wanted to defend the people the system forgot, the ones without a voice. What started as an ordinary day on a bus had shifted her entire future. She would always carry the memory of that moment, of Jamal giving up his seat, not knowing it would lead to any of this. That kindness was more powerful than anyone realized. And sometimes, when the world got too loud or complicated, Jamal would return to the bus stop. Not because he was waiting for a ride, but because that place reminded him of who he was before it all changed. A regular kid who did something kind. A quiet moment that turned into a spark. In the end, the story wasn't about courtrooms or headlines. It wasn't just about an FBI agent or a corrupt officer. It was about the choices people make in everyday moments and how those choices can shape the world around them. Whether it's standing up to injustice or giving up a seat to someone who needs it more, those moments matter. They always have. So when people ask Jamal now what happened that day, he tells them the truth. He says, "I was just trying to do the right thing. I didn't know what it would lead to." But maybe that's the point. You never really know how far your kindness can go. And with that, the story came full circle. Not with a perfect ending, but with a real one. A story that began with a seat on a bus and ended with the truth finally being heard. A story about justice, kindness, and the courage to speak up, even when it's hard. Because in the end, one act of kindness didn't just change Jamal's life, it helped change everything.